Hold up. Error occurred while trying to record. That's not good. Let's try again. Welcome to the show. Matt Brown, Extra Points is the newsletter. Thank you for joining us today. How are you, sir?
I'm doing wonderful. Thanks for having me, fellas.
So we've got a lot of stuff to discuss, not the least of which, of course, is the release of the EA Sports culture hit, College Football 25, something that used up a lot of my college time when I was in school. And obviously, a lot of people asking you a lot of questions. And so we'll get to that coming up. But I wanted to start give everybody a Cliff Notes sort of rundown of your career and how you got to the beat you're on now with a newsletter covering the business side of a very complicated sport that has gotten even more complicated as your newsletter has unfolded. So give us a quick rundown of how you got here.
Yeah. So for those that aren't familiar, because I can understand why somebody who's only found out about my work over the past couple of weeks just thinks I'm a video game reporter. I publish a newsletter called Extra Points, which covers off the field stories in the college sports industry. So that's a lot of business and policy stories. It's legal stories. And it's stuff about licensing and how people get money, how they spend that money, from the largest Power 5 institutions down to Division 3 and NAIA. Publishes 4 days a week. It's been running since 2020. And honestly, running this has been the best job I think I've had yet. I had a great little career at SB Nation. I've gotten a chance to write for some cool newspapers. I've done a bunch of non-journalism work in my career. I kind of came into this industry through the back door. I had taught elementary school. I had done political organizing. I did like HR consulting. And honestly, all of those other things and my kind of unique upbringing helped prepare me for this kind of work. Because
how much did elementary school prepare you for dealing with like college administrators?
Legitimately, we'll talk about that first, right? So what I did for teaching is I did, like a big dumb idiot, I did Teach for America. So I have a political science degree. I got essentially 6 weeks of training, and then I taught on the West Bank in New Orleans, a couple years after the hurricane. And what I tell people is one of the really great skills I learned in that environment is you have to develop thick skin. There is nothing an athletic director or a conference commissioner or an industry person could say to me that a 10-year-old in Louisiana didn't say to me earlier, and way more profanely and personally, right? Like, you can't hurt me because my kids are already dunked on me a gajillion times, right? I in college I took a break from college to go serve an LDS mission. Similar thing. If you knock on doors trying to talk to people about Jesus and nobody wants to talk to you, that's great practice for trying to call up Gene Smith or call Greg Sankey, right? Because you've already heard everything, so it doesn't bother me. You also have to learn how to try to take relatively complicated concepts and try to distill them or simplify them as much as possible, and stand on your head a little bit, because it's kind of an entertainer gig. So those things very practically, but also, when you work in education, even just a little bit, you begin to have a better understanding about how everything sort of fits together. If you understand the school districts where a lot of recruits come from, I think you look at the recruiting process with a little bit more empathy than you might if you went to Syracuse and never lived or spent any time in any part of this world at all. One of the great things about my kind of hodgepodge background is that it gave me the life experience and professional experience to see how college sports is connected to much larger ecosystems, whether that's in higher education or in business or in law or politics, which would be hard for me to do if I had to spend so much of my career going to practice every day. I don't begrudge anybody for not filing all the nerd FOIAs that I do, because you have to go talk to coach 3 times a week, and you have to go chase the 17-year-old, and you have to write 6 recaps from the press box. I don't have to do any of that stuff. So I can focus on these things, which has been really professionally rewarding.
So you go through the, like you said, you come in the back door, but you do some
Yeah.
stuff that is fairly I'll use the word traditional just in the sense of
Yeah.
like covering the game and sort of the way we all sort of started covering it. Um,
Yep.
where did the idea for Extra Points come from, and why are, I guess at the time, how much, I guess how many more subjects are now available to you than today than were when you sort of formed the idea for Extra Points?
Yeah, so let me answer that first question, first, right? When I was at SB Nation for a long time, and there's a lot of really great things about working for that kind of place in the mid to late 2010s. But one of the challenges too is that we had no access. We had very little budget, and if you're trying to write about college sports or anything, and you're competing against CBS and ESPN and Bleacher Report, these other places that have broadcast contracts or that can go to every single event, it's difficult to get anybody to get on the phone with me, right? If I'm writing the same kind of story that the rest of the internet's writing, they're always going to do a better job. So there was a major focus on how can we zig where everybody else is zagging. Part of that is through voice. I'm not as funny or smart as Spencer Hall, so I can't really do that. But that's one thing that people can do. I'm not as connected or as good of a traditional reporter as Stephen Godfrey. He can do some of those kind of deep dive things. That's not where I can go. But this is where I learned how to file open records requests. This is where I realized that, there's like a legal mechanism to make people talk to me or share information, even if they don't want to pick up the phone. And then once I do that a couple of times, then they'll pick up the phone because then they want to provide context for those documents. I just learned to do that through trial and error, really, for 6-7 years. And I began to discover I'm actually interested in some of this kind of financial reporting. I'm interested in how this is connected to higher education. But one of the things I learned from doing that is that these kind of things generally don't scale. You're not going to get 300,000 people to read a story about anyone's finances or about a legal settlement or about athlete organizing. But you might be able to get 10,000, and maybe 1,000 of those people will pay for it. And that wasn't SB Nation's model. That wasn't the model of virtually anybody. This was before The Athletic, during that time period. But then, kind of fast forward, it's 2020, it's the pandemic. I get laid off. Our parent company decides I don't really want to be in the sports business anymore. And now it's become more popular for people to start newsletters because I'm a bigger brand. I want to throw off the yoke of the tyrannical publisher and editor. Like, for me, this was desperation, man. Like, I got a mortgage, I got kids, I got a family. I can't go work for the Chicago Sun-Times because there's no jobs. It's 2020. So I figured I want to start this. I'm going to write about what I'm passionate about. I want to write about what I know not better than everybody. I'm not on the SBJ, but I can do this differently from everyone and recognize if I do a newsletter and I do a subscription model, I don't have to chase scale. I can just be me for the right 10,000 people. And I've been really lucky that the audience responded almost immediately. That audience within the college sports industry and a surprising number of people outside that industry that have become very interested in it, and that's begun to expand the scope of some of the things that I can write about because now people come to me and say, have you considered this? Have you let me introduce you to that, which has been great when I've been stuck at my house for a lot of that time period, right during the pandemic, or helping with elementary school and these other things where I couldn't go to all these conferences that maybe some of my peers have been able to do.
You're lucky to kind of do this at the time that NIL explodes, and all of a sudden there is this, as a fan, a need to know things off the field in a way that maybe they hadn't before. What's it been like covering NIL and trying to figure out exactly kind of like what the impact is and where it is? Because a lot of it's still really opaque.
It is. And one of the challenges I think of this particular beat, one is it's hard to get really accurate information. Anybody that's spent any time covering college recruiting knows that people lie, right? Coaches lie, agents lie, players lie, and
No.
and I hate to insinuate that.
We don't have a breaking news drop on the show. Like, we don't have one of those.
But yeah, sometimes people are not always truthful. And as this industry has grown, it's also, you had an influx of people that have a financial stake in particular outcomes, right? Like, I'm going to try to advance this particular narrative of the industry because I own an equity stake in the software company, or because I represent X number of collectives. So the thought process is, how do I get a handle on this world? Do it in a way that's unique, and do it in a way that's not beholden to maybe one advertiser or one entrenched interest. one of the really rewarding things that I did that I think has really helped me in that coverage that I probably couldn't have done had I been at a more, dead tree traditional outlet, is I did a bunch of NIL deals. I did this in 2021. I paid 13, 14 athletes to promote Extra Points. And what I learned in that process, I wasn't showing out big money, but $200 here, $250 there, and then like relentlessly tracking those things. One, I think that kind of gave me a head start in realizing that maybe the effectiveness of some of these campaigns has been oversold a little bit, and now that I think it's become more conventional, not like the common knowledge. It wasn't in 2021, 2022. It's a chance for me to build relationships with athletes that previously was difficult, because if an SID said, I'm not making that guy available, that's all you could do. But if you say, I'm paying him $100 and I'm gonna go send in Jeffrey Kessler to come sue you for antitrust if you don't let him do that deal, suddenly you can reach out to more people. And that's been helpful. Like the NIL world it's kind of this two-sided thing, because on one hand, I can legitimately see how this can be a mechanism to expand the kind of professional network and world for an athlete. If you're a football player, your world can be very small. You're just in that football facility, and you might not know what financial services salespeople do. You might not have any connection to this world, and so when your career's done, you don't have people. And through NIL, you can have access to internships or exposures that maybe you didn't have in Meridian, Mississippi, or Lancaster, Ohio, and you can have this, which is, I think, that's America, baby. Like, if you can't get excited about that, like, maybe we don't have a whole lot of things in common. But then there's also this other industrial complex where there are times when I'm like, I have reporting on this, and I just think, like, nobody I've talked to today is going to see the gates of heaven. Like, there's just a lot of gross dudes here, and then you have to kind of go back and forth and how to handle that.
Oh man, just a line of athletic directors trying to get a chair in hell. I think that's fantastic.
listen. The MTE for basketball scheduling in hell, I think, is going to be going to have a lot of choices.
All right, so you said one of the things you talked about was distilling the information, and I think fans, college football fans, I think are to the point where they're sort of numb to a lot of this stuff: Congress, NIL, lawsuits, et cetera, antitrust. You start doing these conversations, and I think a lot of fans' eyes glaze over. They've been through it now for a few years. Do you have an idea of where we end up, where it goes? Does it matter how far off that is? Because I have a sense of where we're going, but it feels like it's going to take us forever to get to that new structure. How would you advise fans to take all of this stuff that they're tired of knowing about and keeping it like sort of as still part of their fandom? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And, it's funny. I have a lot of empathy for people who tell me this, right? Because I know for so many people, you love college sports because this is an ecosystem where you think you don't ever have to think about Ted Cruz. You don't ever have to think about the words antitrust exemption. And I get that, right? And when that becomes more aggressively part of college sports, I understand why you'd be like, this sucks. And what I would tell people is, like, I don't think everybody necessarily has to know all of this, right? I'm certain my goal as a writer is not to talk down to you if this isn't the world that you want to spend a lot of time in, and if the way you want to consume college football media or college sports is more through the On3 or more through a message board or a top line level, go for it. That's available to you. I'm not here to judge you for that. If you want to understand how the sausage is made and how it connects to everything, like, I'm going to try to help you with that. I'm also, when I sit down at the keyboard, I'm also realizing that my audience for a story might be a fan. It might be the athletic director at Belmont. It might be a player's parents. I get this a lot from, like, swimmers or Olympic sports athletes or students in this wide ecosystem. So I have to try to think, like, how can I communicate this to a couple of different levels? And what I would say about where we're going is, amateurism, as defined by, like, the textbook of the NCAA, like, that hasn't existed since 1904. I think just about all of us understand that. And I think a lot of people understand we're moving towards a world where we're going to dispense with the fiction that Belmont and Tennessee are playing the same game. And whether they're a part of the same organization or not, whether they have explicitly different rules, I don't know. And I could see a world in 3 years where there is no NCAA, and USA Basketball governs an invitational college basketball tournament, and USA Volleyball governs other things. I could see a world where there is an NCAA, and there's 200 schools in it instead of 340 something at the Division I level. And on some level, I don't know if there's a practical difference. I think what I would tell the folks is, be engaged with this as much as you want to be or feel comfortable with it. it is part of the world, so you can't pretend that it's not there. And it is a part of the reason why your roster is going to look the way that it does. But maybe this is just the bias of somebody that has to live in the weeds for this so much. I am not so confident in knowing exactly how all of this ends. And maybe that's just because it's easy to write off Congress if there's a Republican sweep of in the next elections, and Ted Cruz has a greater policymaking arm, or Senator Tuberville. Could things look very different? Yeah. And depending on where you sit, maybe that's a good thing, and that's a bad thing for college sports. I don't know what the Supreme Court's going to do. If I did, my newsletter would cost a hell of a lot more than $8. Like that's the kind of thing people would pay $80,000 for. I don't have that kind of money yet, right? It could legitimately go in a bunch of different ways, despite what people who I think would financially benefit from a particular outcome might tell you.
But before we get to the fun stuff, I want to ask you about kind of some nuts and bolts stuff on the newsletter. I mean, a lot of people that wanted to individually publish went to Substack. You chose to go to Beehive. What made you pick that, and how has it been kind of like trying to grow this audience?
No, it's a good question. So the truth is, I've actually used 3 different tools. I started on Substack in I think technically in 2019. I used that for a while, moved to something called Ghost, and then now to Beehive. And when I talk to a lot of reporters and folks that are starting newsletters, and the honest to God truth is, I don't think there's a best system. It depends on how you want to make money and what your resources and goals are. The thing about Substack is that, there's a lot of other sports publications on there. It's a very simple tool to use technically, and it doesn't cost anything up front, which is great for a lot of people. I make almost all of my money through paid subscriptions. And for me to be on Substack, I would be paying well over $10,000 a year in Substack fees for a software service that I don't think is worth anywhere close to that money. So like for me, it doesn't make financial sense. And honestly, I don't think anybody who makes more than $3,000 a month selling subscriptions is getting the best financial deal possible with Substack. So Beehive doesn't take a percentage cut. There's things I really like about Beehive. There's things that I really deeply dislike about Beehive. And I would just tell everybody, it kind of, look, just like when you're a reporter, there's no perfect CMS. There's no perfect newsletter stack. The other kind of challenge about this is, and you might think, I'm a decent reporter. I'm not bad on behind a microphone. How hard could this be? Because the hardest part's making the content, right? And there's some truth to that, but to run this as a business requires you to be good at a bunch of other things. There's a marketing component. There's a technical component. I also sell ads. I don't use ad marketplaces anymore. And what I learned when I got to a particular size is you can't do all those things yourself without dying. There's a reason like people do those different jobs for newspapers, right? So at this point, like I sold an equity stake in Extra Points. I have a business partner. I have a virtual assistant. We're likely to, Lord willing, Extra Points will be like a 5-person company. I'd like to think here by the end of this year, as we try to expand into other services. And that's, I think, what you really have to do if you want to make a living doing this as a newsletter guy, is realize you are a small business, and you have to, if you can't hire it, you either need to dedicate the time to mastering these other things, or you need to have vendors that can help you with those. And that's what we've had to do to become a more, I think, mature business, and one that still allows me to have the energy to be an engaged dad, an engaged husband, and like not go crazy. Because those first year and a half, 2 years, was rough. There's just no way around it. They were 70-hour weeks all the time.
All right, fun stuff. And maybe you're tired of it. I don't know. I want to start with a broad question about the game itself, which is that sometimes, they're old, pretty basic capitalist economic marketing concept that scarcity, right, leads to demand. And the fact that it was not around for so long, when so many of us, in particular, the 3 of us here, were sort of like coming of age professionally. And like, is there an element to its cult status and cult following? Now, look, I got started in like the mid 90s as a middle schooler playing the game on Sega. It's why I got Sega, was for FIFA and for college football. There you go. Exactly. And I wasted a lot of hours in college using this. I got a job and eventually got married and had kids. And so that sort of the video game time of my week has disappeared. But I am still I say all that to say it's my favorite product that I've ever used as a gamer. I wouldn't consider myself a gamer anymore. Do you think some of the cult status and some of the interest and some of the love is not just because the game was great and it's our favorite sport of all time, or is it because of this that it was gone that we are so obsessed with its return?
I think unquestionably that's true. And there's two kind of particular emotional components, I think, with NCAA 14, like the last game in the system. You're right. For a lot of working sports writers who are in our mid 30s to early 40s, this was a major part of our high school, college, and early 20 experience. And then you're right. A lot of us then got married. We had children. We had different stages in our professional careers. I can't play this for 10 hours like I did at Ohio State instead of like going to class. I'm like, no, like I know I'm supposed to go to international relations, but Hawaii, I'm year 9 of my Hawaii dynasty, and if I don't do it, my roommate will and screw this up for me, right? And so on some level,
terrible roommate.
Terrible roommate. You go back at this, and I think there's maybe people don't explicitly have this thought, but there is an element of nostalgia where if I have this game in my hands again, I can feel like I'm 21. I can feel a little bit to how I was when my life was simpler and I didn't have as many responsibilities. I know it's not the same thing, but you mythologize that a little bit, like we do with bands, like we do with whatever garbage Chinese restaurant or terrible pizza place we had on campus. The squirrels on your campus are not different from everywhere else. The pizza place is probably the same, but it was yours. And this game is yours. So there's definitely some of that. And there's a little bit of rose-colored glasses about the game itself, too. Like, I've played NCAA 14 recently. I have a 360 in my office. It's a great football game. It's not perfect. We still have middle linebackers that could jump 60 feet up in the air to intercept passes over the middle. The option mechanic is probably overpowered. There's a bug in the game's logic. So if you play as dynasty mode, the triple option teams have some huge advantage. And Army is always a powerhouse after 6 years. So it's not perfect, right? But I think in our heads, because of what it represented, because it was the only thing, it became perfect to a lot of people. And I think it's going to be interesting in 3 months as more folks get time on the sticks with this game, if that changes their relationship to the older games, or also changes their relationship to this when, like, I don't, not to be glib about it, when they play this for a month and realize, like, oh yeah, this isn't going to make me happy the way that I thought it would because I'm still 40, right? And even though I didn't think this was going to make me 22, it's now clear that it didn't. You know what I mean?
Yep. What is the number? So what was the number? What's the number one question that fans ask you and want to know about the game? And is that the thing that you thought it was going to be? Like going into this launch, did you think fans were going to say X, Y, and Z, or is it something that you weren't anticipating?
They're all things I wasn't anticipating. And I think part of that is because I'm not a capital G gamer. Part of that is certainly not a competitive one, right? And, I like we all maybe kind of do, I assume that the majority of people interface with this game the way that I did, where the typical way of playing is single player dynasty, where we take some crappy program and make them less crappy and move up. And, I went to Ohio State, but I spent a hell of a lot more time playing with Tulane or Hawaii or Wyoming than I ever did anything in Columbus. And I realized that isn't the experience for everybody else, right? So I get so many questions about customization of equipment. I've never thought about shoulder pads ever when playing any of this, but like the manufacturers and the height and the specific way that those pads look for some people, deeply, deeply important.
You obviously never created yourself in the video game. Because if you created,
but yeah, I didn't care about but when I created myself, I'm like speed 99. It wasn't like what are my spats looking like? Like, I wasn't thinking about that. Well, people did.
So much time on the wristbands and the visor and the all that, a waste of time. But yes,
sure, which is what a lot of other people did. I've gotten questions about the in-game experience, or what makes particular stadiums and broadcasts unique, at a level of detail that even somebody who makes his living obsessing over tiny stuff hadn't thought about. Like, multiple people have said, can you tell me if the sun's going to be in the correct position relative to what time the game kicks off, right? Am I going to see the sunset over the mountains of the Rose Bowl at exactly the right time? Or is it if a noon kickoff, is it going to look different than a 3:30? Is it synced with the actual Weather Channel? I'm like, how the hell would I know that? Like, I would have never thought to ask. And some of this is useful, right? Like I do, despite the pleas of my therapist and wife, I do check my mentions, right? And some, I do forward some of these questions, right? I do try to understand things a little bit, but then there are things that come back and I'm like, my brother in Christ, you just got to touch grass. Like this is something that even the people that made the game do not think about.
I would highly highly recommend to everyone the Q&A / mailbag you did here recently on this, and kind of like just the flood of questions, because I think it gets to the mania around this. People were asking you about specific songs, were they sung in stadiums, and that sort of thing. It's a great mailbag. People should check it out. The thing I wonder,
Lord willing, there'll be another one soon.
the thing I wonder about this game is, you're right. It's been away for a decade now, and so obviously there's a lot of pent up demand for it. But how much of this do you think is going to be like release the Snyder cut? It's just not like it's not a big part of the video game universe. I mean, the release on this is going to get a lot of hype, obviously, because if there's one thing that the folks at EA do really well is hype things up. But I mean, it's not going to be as big a game as Madden, or it's not going to be nearly as big a game as a FIFA / ESPN FC or whatever.
Yeah. No, you're right. Like this is actually something where I get maybe some of the most negative feedback from fans, and I think part of the challenge is in the college sports universe is that we can fall into bubbles a little bit, right? And we think that everybody cares about Mississippi State football as much as we do, because everyone at church and everyone in our community and everyone that we know cares very deeply about that, or this space. In the last couple of years when they made both games, Madden would routinely sell more copies in the first week than NCAA would its entire run. And it's a little bit different now, and most analysts, both people at EA that I've spoken to, and some folks that work for stock picking agencies that have to do financial analysis of EA and have to be able to predict these kind of things. There's a lot of optimism that this game is going to sell better than other college sports games. It's going to do better revenue because you have an ultimate team component to it. But no one that I've talked to professionally expects this to do half of Madden's revenue. And part of that is because I think a lot of people misunderstand how much more popular the NFL is than anything else in this country, even college football. And I think also we have a group of people that may not fully appreciate how popular Madden and the NFL is becoming globally, right? Like, I joked about this in another show earlier this week. Like, a lot of my family is in Brazil. They're playing an NFL game there. There are Eagles fans in Brazil. If you go to Mexico, there are Raiders bars. There's Cardinals bars. People watch these games. You can get the NFL on linear television in Europe and in South America. You can't get college football that way. And if you try to explain,
there's no Tulane bar in Sao Paulo, you're saying?
If there is, I haven't gone to that gringo neighborhood yet, right? I haven't found the two greenies. They're probably working for like the State Department.
It's definitely not in the favela. Yeah, you're right.
Right, where people are jerry rigging electricity and stuff.
Right.
So and that manifests in video game sales. If you try to explain how college football works to somebody in Europe, it's the language barrier is not going to be the biggest source of confusion. Like, this thing doesn't exist. Now that could change, and this is actually something that people at EA kind of mentioned and maybe asked kind of on background, but they see their role in this industry in American football as like, we can help promote American football, we can help shape American football in some ways, and maybe the fact that this game is going to be available worldwide for the first time really ever. You kind of had to really go out of your way to get this game in Europe before, like a modded Xbox and everything. That might help encourage interest in college sports. That's music to Brett Yormark's ears, right? Like, this is not a joke. This game might help people go to that Mexico game whenever you decide you want to do it, because different people are gonna see it. But this is not GTA 6. This is not FIFA. This is not, I don't even know, it may not even be Cyberpunk, right? Like, it's very big in our corner of the world. Yeah. It's most anticipated sports game probably ever, but it's like, that's still not the gaming universe, and that's okay. It doesn't have to be for EA to want to keep making this.
What is the? I'm curious, like how different the gameplay is, because they also missed the entire playoff era, which is completely random. But I'm curious how different the gameplay is going to be. People are going to get in there, and I think fans in general are in for, like, I don't think we've come to grips with the changes that have happened in the last 2 years that are going to be we're all going to see them on Saturdays this fall. Like, I don't think we're I think we all have thought about them, and us in the industry have talked about them ad nauseum. But I don't think.
Yeah.
Well, I still think your Saturday, I guess your 4 hours, I guess, in the stadium or watching your favorite team, is it going to change at all? I don't think, unless private equity comes in, but that's a whole other podcast.
That's a different show, yeah.
I think everything is still kind of the same, but I still don't. Fans aren't prepared. I think the video game, ironically, is going to be the thing that all of a sudden you're going to get to the end of your first season or the middle of your first season, and you're going to be seeing and looking at things so differently, even as a gamer, that I don't think that the fan base has truly grappled with or understood, or maybe even the media, as to how different fall of 2024 is going to be.
This is a great point. And I want to talk about this in two different ways, right? Because there's the how is the game itself different, like when the ball is kicked from Madden and from previous games, and then there's like how the holistic game is different. Let me talk about the gameplay part here first, because I imagine people will be curious about that. When this game comes out, I'm sure there's going to be people on YouTube that are going to look at it and still scream that it's a carbon copy of Madden. And it fundamentally isn't, but if you got two football games made by the same company, if there are going to be similarities, it's still football. What my experience from playing it for a few hours was, this feels really different from the last game. I sucked the first hour. I mean, I'm not a great video game player anyway, but I was really bad the first hour I was playing, because the throw mechanics, how you read option, how zone blocking works, a lot of it looks and feels different. I played the new Madden the day before. It didn't feel like exactly the same game. I always say, especially with how tackling works. And a big reason is just because of the massive talent differential and a typical college game versus an NFL game. The college game also feels way faster, way more random, a little bit more arcadey. I feel confident that on the balance, more people are going to like the gameplay than dislike it, even if there's a little bit of a learning curve and you have to think about things differently. Because this one, you won't be able to spam the same 4 plays the way that maybe a lot of us did in college. But to your broader point, I'm fascinated not just in how this is going to play when running a dynasty, but how people will respond, because this is unique. You're going to be able to play a video game college football playoff before the real college football playoff.
Right.
They had to program a 12-team playoff without having great data on what the logic is going to be for how teams are selected, right? How do you process, if you're building game logic, what the hell just happened with Florida State? Is that a one-off? Do you build in SEC bias into the module? Like, how are you calculating SOS versus how this committee might doing it? There's going to be a little bit of guesswork, right? And maybe we tweak the sliders a little bit after the playoff comes out. But I can't think of a time in sports in another game or another era where such a enormous real life difference happens digitally before it happens in real life. Same thing with recruiting. Think about how you built rosters in the last game. There's one signing period. The transferring is almost non-existent. You have a hard scholarship scholarship limit. You have an under 85-man roster count, and talent is not distributed geographically the same way it is in real life. Now you have to recruit with the transfer portal. There's multiple the signing period system's not the same way. You're not just doing raw point allocation to bring people up here. The ability to bring in high school talent at a G5 program is going to be way harder. The redshirting rules are completely different. People could transfer multiple times now. And so I think this is a chance to help people understand how just bat-spit crazy roster management is now, and more complicated than it was before. And this is a conversation I had with a lot of these developers about how to balance realism and fun. Because if we made this game completely realistic, you guys would freaking hate it. All that is just payroll management and lying to kids. It's 2006. And
ironically,
you could see,
I think I could do a lot better in that game than I could in like the actual gameplay.
If you have a big enough credit card, maybe, right? But like, you don't want to live like Ole Miss lives in a video game. It won't be fun. And so trying to kind of balance those things is hard. If you want really hardcore, you might like the games that we make. You might like Athletic Director Simulator, where your life can be ruined if you pick the wrong MMR partner. If you just want to stunt on your rival, this video game might be a little bit more your speed.
I would totally buy a game called Athletic Director from EA Sports.
I'm not kidding. Like, we did make that game. Like, and that is something you could play on your computer on our website right now. And like I've talked with developers, at EA, like, hey, listen, if you want to sub-license this, it's pretty cheap. We could build this into GM mode in the future, but whenever I can get time away from like tracking down Patriot League budgets, we're fiddling and trying to make this game a little bit more complicated. And that's informed my reporting too, because now I think I understand how games are made a little bit better than maybe the average bear on this beat.
I want to be able to split scholarships on the baseball team though, so that I keep my backup center fielder and that kind of stuff
Sure.
too.
No, they're like press A to drop Vanderbilt scholarship mode, and like, oh look, everybody got an academic grant. This is way easier. How about that? So glad everybody got a 30 on their ACT.
And I know, and again, if you want to read a fantastic story about a bowling championship, go check out the Extra Points. We here in Nashville, of course, know all about that because Vanderbilt launched its female bowling team and just asked for people on campus, would you like to go to school for free? Please come bowl. And then they won a national championship a couple of years later. So it's a fantastic story. All right. So I will ask you the one quick question to give me the Cliff Notes, because while I am tired and exhausted reading antitrust stuff and Congress and NIL and collectives and lawsuits and labor boards and etc. I'm exhausted in all of that. It doesn't scare me about my enjoyment of the game of college football and, whatever team you love. It doesn't really scare me that a player makes money or that the conferences get bigger. We all adapt. Change happens, but you're going to eat the same smoked meat in the same parking lot, wearing the same shirt, singing the same fight song in the same stadium, because thank God these campuses can't move. So it's not really going to change all that much. But the one thing that terrifies me is it's one of the most inefficient products in all of sports, college football, by its nature. And that terrifies me to start hearing about private equity and capital investment funds, so I know it's a longer conversation, and you've been very gracious with your time, but we'll let you go on this. Am I okay? Is it right to look at private equity as the big threat to the game versus all the other stuff we've been talking about for years?
I'm certainly more concerned about private equity than I am other things. And I mean, I'm a reporter, right? Like, if you're a reporter and you're not concerned about private equity, like, where the hell?
I was going to say they've done such a great job with the journalism industry. So
with journalism and chain restaurants and local housing and
literally every single industry. There's not one that's been made better, I don't think, by private equity.
Yeah, I guess maybe Burger King and maybe a couple of PE people read my newsletter and are like, well, actually, this firm improved 11%. Like, all right, fine. You have fun in the Bloomberg comment section. That's not where I am. I get that, like, in some very specific single place situations where maybe private debt or private capital is a better example, where you're not giving up decision-making power. It's just a different way to raise money. That might work, but part of the beauty of college sports, you're right, is that inefficiency. Like, I mean, I think it was a year ago, right, when Nick Saban was talking about how this is a business and it's also not a business. And I think people dunked on him on Twitter, but he's exactly right. I mean, it's a business, and that everyone cares about growing revenue, and the broadcast companies have enormous influence in how big time college sports runs right now. But you're also you're not trying to do your books like it's a business. You're providing services where you don't really care about cash flow the same way. And if it was just about pure profitability, we'd have 22 college football teams. We wouldn't have the same scope here. I think to your broader point, and I'll kind of leave this here. I think I would mostly agree with you that fundamentally it's unlikely that the Saturday is going to be different. Like, they're still going to have the same smells and sounds. And I am not threatened by a guy making $200,000 carrying the football for Tennessee or Ohio State. One of the other things about this industry that I've really come to love, like, and I mean this, is that we forget that college sports is the second biggest scholarship program in the United States outside of the military. And that means that from divisions 1 through 3, there's a lot of individuals that go to college that might not have that access if it wasn't for sports. And sometimes it's efficient and sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's exploitive, sometimes it's not. But you can look at this system, big school, small school, and realize this is a way for people to help potentially build generational wealth, to break cycles, to meet their future spouses, to meet their groomsmen and their bridesmaids, and to grow in human excellence. And I still, am idealistic and about that world. I'm really pro higher education. I could see how it blessed my immigrant family and how it's changed lives for other people. And I do have some concern that some of these changes in college sports could make it harder for Belmont, or could make it harder for Tennessee Tech or some other places. I don't think it's impossible. I think we just have to be honest with ourselves that as we move to a more just world, there's going to be give and take, and we're going to have to be creative and trying to mitigate harm in one place and grow somewhere else. Do we have the right class of policymakers to make those decisions? Probably not. Right? But I can't fix those, right? All I can do is put a microphone in front of other people. I joke that this is the catastrophe beat, but it's not really.
Matt, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Everybody go sign up. Extra Points is the newsletter. It is worth your time if you're a college football fan. I understand if you're exhausted by all of this stuff, but to your point earlier, if you would like to understand how your sport is working, no better place than your newsletter. So thank you so much for giving us some time, man. We do appreciate you.
You bet. It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me, fellas.
Absolutely. Thanks for listening, everybody.